yet again, the importance of Bedford College archives and our need to preserve and to celebrate the richness of the archives. And I'll now hand over to Josephine, who's the Assistant Director of the Gender Studies Institute, to give some details about exactly what you're going to hear today. Mike's not really big. So, could you, but you could hear me, I
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Josephine Carr. I work here at Royal Holloway and can often be found in the archives when I'm supposed to be elsewhere. Thankfully, the Bedford Committee gave me an official reason for spending even more time in the archives by looking for some interesting pieces from Bedfordian students and staff to celebrate this wonderful anniversary of 175 years. So, having found the extracts, I then Can you hear me with that? Can you hear me? No, really. Is that better? Oh dear. Okay, having found some wonderful extracts, I then had to find some wonderful volunteers because I knew that people wouldn't want to listen to me all afternoon. So I have great pleasure in introducing Jennifer Glastonbury, who is also on the committee, and she studied French in 1969. I've then got Betty Hales, who studied physics in 1973. I have Doreen Peach, who studied history in 1957. And because I wanted to celebrate the inclusion of men in Bedford, because we had the same issue in Royal Holloway, but let's not mention that. I've got the wonderful Heathcliff. Heathcliff is a PhD student here and has also done an archives placement specifically for Bedford, looking at the Northcote travel bursaries. He's also going to talk to you about his work in the Victorian Centre when he does his speech. So I'm going to hand you all over. How the afternoon is going to work is everybody will read their extract. Some are shorter than others and give their personal reminiscences and thoughts. And then at the end, we're going to have questions and general reminiscence, because when you've heard all five, you will be amazed at the number of issues that are still prevalent to us all today. So I'm going to pass over to Jennifer. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
If you don't mind, I think I'd prefer to be seated because I have some mobility problems at the moment. But I'm absolutely delighted to see a lot of familiar faces here today and some people I don't know. And it's just wonderful that you've come, I think, to the college for this anniversary occasion. I have got a 3-line whip from Josephine because I have the longest passage to read. So my reminiscences afterwards, you'll be pleased to hear probably, are going to be quite short, although the passage itself is quite long. And my passage is not from a diary or a letter. It's actually extracts from an interview given by a Bedfordian held in the college archives. And this was an interview which took place in 1987 with Mrs. Lily Valentine Turnberry, née Lily Valentine Vass, who was born on the 14th of February 1891, and it's all about her time at Bedford College from 1910 to 1914. So I will just speak as if I'm giving the interview because I'm not actually reading a letter or a diary. Yes, so I attended the Girls' County School in Dover. In those days, the girls' school teachers were not qualified to teach for higher level exams. So a group of us went over to the boys' school to study for the London matric, that's matriculation. Before we went over to the boys' school, we would go to prayers in the girls' school and then end the day in the boys' school. So they were at the boys' school all day. So the maths for the London BA Intermediate was easier, and I passed the exam, staying at the YWCA in Kensington. The bedroom was a large dormitory divided into cubicles. It was very hot weather and difficult to sleep. A girl who had come up from Holloway College in Englefield Green to take the intermediate, sorry, this is this exam. And so she and I sat on the floor where it was cooler, and we talked throughout the night. It was the memory of those talks with her which prevented me from minding too much about the later merger between the two colleges. So why Bedford? My first choice was to study history, and for this, Somerville was best. But I thought it was far too far for my father to visit me. He had a business rail ticket only for London. And French was still my favourite, but my headmaster strongly recommended Caroline Spurgeon's lectures, although she had not been at Bedford College very long. She was appointed in July 1901. Yes. So I applied to go to Bedford College, and I knew absolutely nothing about it when I went. So here is a little account of my first day at Baker Street. Now, those of you who attended the lecture here earlier on this today will have seen pictures of that property in Baker Street. So my father dropped me off at the front door with my luggage and went away. So the college had offered me the following rooms. Either I could have a single room without a fireplace, £58, a shared room with a fireplace, £58, a single room with a fireplace, £63, a large single room with a fireplace, £68. I did not want to go without a fireplace, and so I decided to take the risk on sharing with another girl. Our room was on the top floor. It had 2 divan beds, one against the window, one against the wall, a washstand with a jug and basin and a little screen, then a table, 2 hard chairs, 2 easy chairs and a shared wardrobe. I don't remember any bookcases. There was a gas fire and a ring. So we brought our own linen, and Greg Lurs talked about that this morning, that the students had to bring their own linen, bed covers and towels. And the college provided blankets. And later I bought a double-sized Indian cotton bedspread, red, and a bolster to make the bed look more like a sofa, and also some pictures. So the big entrance hall was laid up for formal dinner. There was a high table and then smaller tables laid up for about 8. There was also a table known as the slum, at which you had to sit if you weren't perfectly dressed. The next day, Thursday, we were interviewed by the tutors. I tried to take French as my main subject, as I enjoyed it and had been well taught at my girls' school. But the lecturer, Miss Johnson, asked if I could guarantee that I would spend the long vacation each year in France. For financial reasons, I had to say no. I therefore enrolled in Miss Spurgeon's English class, taking older medieval English, and the structure of the language with Mr. P. Thomas. I never found this easy, as the structure is different from the structure of the Romance languages. I'd have done better to take German as a subsidiary, but I took French as the subsidiary subject, which was required by university regulations, and I did not attend the lectures by Professor Rudler, the university professor. He was only for the French honours students. Miss Johnson and Miss Champenois, who spoke English with an Oxford drawl, taught me. So she in the end, she wasn't allowed to study French as her main subject because she couldn't guarantee that income to spend on going to France in the long vacations. Anyway, sorry, back to the interview. I also joined a gymnastics class, and about 8 of us in a pretty little gymnasium, and I got on quite well. But after one term, the instructor advised me to stop because I wasn't really suited to gymnastics and the classes were too much for me. So for the first 2 terms, both the residence and lectures were at Baker Street, all under one roof. I didn't even have to put my hat on. So, and she says, that's what I call resident. So the room was on the top floor, and most of the other people on the corridor were in our year, although some were senior people. At Baker Street, I shared a room with Connie, but in the new building, there was no sharing. Connie and I had next door rooms on the ground floor of Reed, so that was the other building. When I returned after my 1 term's break, I was promoted to Cheyenne, so that must have been another building. At Baker Street, housemaids brought brown cans of hot water for us to wash. So like Greg Lers's talk, you know, he talked about having maids, didn't he? That some of them had maids. There was 1 bathroom on each floor. When we got to Reed, there were bathrooms in the corridors. If you wanted a bath and found an empty bathroom, you hung your towel on the door as a sign. If you did not sign your name in the book before breakfast at 8 a.m, someone would come to find you in your room and see if you were all right. And then, except on Sundays when you made your own bed, you had to leave your room to the maids. Ours, Emma, we suspected of skimping, as she just skimmed the top of the furniture with a feather duster. So she didn't sound much cock, really. So trigger warning here. No black-skinned students were allowed in the residence, although they could come as day students. We had yellow-skinned and Indian and some brown-skinned. We were required to write 3 substantial, about 16 pages, essays per term. And these were then discussed in seminars. At lectures, you took your notes on the right-hand side of the page and you set out the references on the left-hand side. I'm writing about friends. This is quite interesting. The regulations advised us to make friends in our own year to prevent what were known as crushes between junior and senior girls. The fresher who had the room next to mine in my 2nd year wanted me to be her friend, but I advised against it. There was a great distinction between juniors and seniors, although seniors performed many acts of kindness to freshers. Connie and I agreed that we would be friends. We would do things together, but we didn't take advantage of each other. Her father part-owned a coal mine, and she had spent time as a governess in Belgium. She was very self-assured, and she had much more money than I had. She had £97 per year, and I had 10 shillings every 3 weeks. But we did everything together on an equal footing. And turning to the war, in the early days, the war didn't make much difference to us. Food rationing did not start until 1917. We were not so prepared as we were in 1939, however. The main difference was that our fire practices came about more often. If you saw your fire captain sitting at dinner in the slum with her day clothes on, you knew that that night you would be turned out in your dressing gown. In the war years, we each had a bucket of water in our room with some gauze and a packet of washing soda. If a gas attack came, you were to dissolve the soda in the water, soak the gauze, and then put it on as a mask over your face. On careers, I got married in 1916, and I didn't work after that. We didn't expect to have a career and marriage in my day. So that's the reading. Now, my reflections and my reminiscences will be very brief, but I also studied French at Bedford, and I suppose the main difference between my experience and hers was that I did go to France in the long vacations, but was funded by my local authority, so there was no question of our paying ourselves. And in fact, when I was at Bedford College, people were dissuaded from going abroad for the whole year in their second or third year, and were only really allowed to go if they failed their first year exams. And the rationale for that was that it was said that people lost a kind of academic discipline by just going off to Paris or Nice or wherever, and then they didn't do so well when they came back. So I went to Nice for one of mine and to La Rochelle for the second one. But you would study at a university for a month, and then in both cases I then got jobs quite easily. In both of these cases, quite cushy jobs actually. One was with a very rich family where I just had to chat to the 4 children in English. But we went off on all sorts of nice excursions and so on as a family, and the other one as a companion to a lady in Nice. So, and I spoke to her in French all the time. So it was very good actually for one's French. So I think this business of money, but of course, nowadays students have to fund themselves, don't they? And take out loans and so on. So that's, I think, my one reminiscence about it. And I think the reflection probably would be to do with, what she says about people of other races studying, which to some extent, was a very positive thing. One must think at that time, that it was so early and that they did have students of all colours, as she says, studying there, although they weren't allowed to be in the residence. They could only be day pupils. So perhaps, Josephine, that's something we could go back to in our discussion. Yes. So perhaps we could then hand on to the next speaker, Betty. Yes.
Okay. Well, I do prefer to speak standing, so I'm going to stand up. And I don't know if I need this at all. But yes, I do. Right, okay. Is it on? Can you hear me? That's good. Right. I've been given a very short piece to read. And I don't like to sort of assume why that might be, but I did study physics, so it was obviously thought that my language skills possibly weren't up to reading a long. I'm reading something from a lady called Anne Duffel, and she was at Bedford. She says, I was a student at Bedford from 1948 to 1951. Now, it's very interesting because I was born in 1951. So I thought, let's see how things changed during the 18 years between me being born and growing up going to Bedford. And she was, if she went to 18, she would have been born in 1930, which was actually the year that my mother was born. So I quite related to her in a few ways. I sort of interestingly thought about my mother and thinking, well, if she was born in 1930 and then she had me in 1951, and this nice lady Anne was just graduating there. And I'm saying all this, we'll see why when I get to the content of what she's written. She says, as promised, I enclose my Bedford College blazer. And there was a nice picture up there as I walked in of a lot of Bedford students sitting in their blazers. And I haven't seen one of these blazers, but I can imagine what it must have been like. And the thought that you went to Bedford College and then wore a blazer. I just escaped from school when I went to Bedford College, and I think I probably burned my blazer. Right. And she says, I've given my college blazer and my diary for the archive collection. That's really pleasant. Apparently this happened in the 1990s. So that means that Anne Duffel will have been in her 60s when she donated her blazer and gave her diary. She then goes on to say, there's nothing personal in the diary. The only 2 entries of note are the birth of Prince Charles And she says, that sure dates me. Well, it sort of dates me too, because my memories of Prince Charles were on those lovely little national savings stamps that we used to buy at school. And my memory says that the ones of Princess Anne, which were the only ones I ever managed to buy, were 6p, or 6d as it was in those days. And the ones of Prince Charles actually cost £0.50, and I certainly never ever managed to buy one of those. Used to stick them in a lovely little book. No idea what happened to them after you filled the book. I can't remember.
Certificate.
Yes, you probably did. You did get a certificate for being a good saver. And then her second memory, this is the one that she talks about here, is a lecture by Dr. Helen Wright. She was invited by the Students' Union to give us an illustrated, and that's quite an important word, illustrated explanation of the facts of life. She faced a packed hall of students, all women obviously, all anxious to learn what their mothers had in many cases not told them. She then says how times have changed. Well, I shall interject here too, because one of my memories of being at Bedford College, I actually took a year out in between school and college, sort of to earn a bit of money, but I think it just I chickened out. I was too scared, quite honestly, to go to university. I came from a working class family, and most of my family hadn't got a clue what happened at a university. I managed to get married during that year. So my knowledge of the facts of life came to me through having just got married, really. Although I have a slight inkling I might have found out something about it a little before I got married. But I was only 18 at the time, and who knows. She says she faced this this hall of anxious students, as I've said. You will appreciate that there was no sex education in schools in those days, and all that most of us knew was that that was what we'd gathered from garbled accounts from other schoolgirls who had managed to have sexual encounters. Ooh. I wonder the extent of those sexual encounters, who knows? And what we could glean from any smutty books we could lay our hands on. Right, smutty books. Anybody remember smutty books? I have to interject here too. My father worked on a newspaper stand, and I have to tell you that most of my sex education came with my brother from looking at the magazines that were kept in the bottom of my mum and dad's wardrobe that they sold on this newspaper stand. So there you go. Not quite the same as the poor children nowadays have to suffer, and I think that's absolutely dreadful. I mean, fancy young children at primary school accessing porn on their phones. It just doesn't bear thinking about. And she says, I know I was very grateful to Dr. Wright, and I believe that many others were too. I don't think any other Bedford memorabilia, I don't think I have any, other Bedford memorabilia. See what I mean about the physics? But I came across anything, if I come across anything of interest, I will certainly contact you again. So I found that quite moving, actually. And it was a shame that Anne Duffel didn't tell us anything else really about what she experienced at Bedford. I don't even know what she graduated in, and I'd love to find out more. So I think I'm going to dig into this a bit more later. As I say, I studied physics. I started at Bedford in 1970, and I don't think that was too long after they'd started admitting men. But when I went to Bedford, all I knew was I'd gone and looked round it, and it was in the middle of Regent's Park, and there were ducks between Baker Street Station and the university. And I think I decided I was going to take the place even before I went in there because of the ducks, really. And I'm grateful for that because those ducks cheered me up on so many mornings. Because I was married, I just laugh at that now. I fancy a 19-year-old getting married. I mean, how stupid can anybody be? And because I was married and recently married, I think that was the main focus of my life. And the fact that, and it was my husband who persuaded me to take the plunge and go to university, and he was unbelievably supportive. But even so, it still was my job to do all the washing and the ironing and the cooking and the shopping and all the rest of it. So university sort of took a bit of a second place to that. And that's really sad. And I wish I'd enjoyed more of my university days just as a student and not as this newly married person who, of course, because I was living at home and we couldn't have afforded anything any closer than Walthamstow, every day I had to walk to the tube station. My memories are it was always raining. And I do think it really was raining an awful lot more then than it does now. And then I would get on the tube and I would always get a chocolate bar out of the machine on the tube. And I always had a migraine, and I didn't for at least 20 years relate the chocolate and the migraine. I sort of thought it was just because I was working so hard at my studies. Yeah, so there's that memory, there's the park, there's that. The physics, it's funny, it sort of takes a bit of a second place. I remember that we went into a laboratory twice a week and we did experiments. But even though men had only been admitted a couple of years before, my classes and my lectures were absolutely crammed full of men. There were only 3 women. I sort of remember it as being a little bit like we were put down, even though presumably a few years before that it was just women studying physics. Although I don't know how many, because as I say, there were only 3 in the year when I graduated. And I don't feel, I have to say quite sadly, I don't feel that as women we were particularly encouraged. Even in the laboratory, there were 2 male postgraduate students that used to obviously earn money supervising the practicals. They didn't encourage us. It was more of an attitude of coming around, oh, let me connect this up for you. You know, you probably can't even read a circuit diagram. Well, yes, I could. I was studying physics, but it wasn't really I don't feel that as women we were pushed enough. We weren't encouraged to go on and do postgraduate study. We weren't really encouraged to become anything other than physics teachers. And physics teachers is quite a good thing. That's what I became, and I did enjoy it. I'd always wanted to be an architect. But at the time when my children were old enough for me to go and be an architect, unfortunately, the bottom wood fell out of the market and there weren't that many jobs for architects, so I didn't bother. I stayed teaching. What else can I remember about Bedford? Just a little story someone told me this morning, which absolutely summed it up for me. Apparently, when there was a sit-in at Bedford College, the management went round to the students who were sitting in and offered them tea, coffee and snacks. At LSE, when they had a sit-in, the first thing the management did was to phone the police to get the students out. And that really rang home because Bedford did feel like a nice place to be. It was friendly, it was small and encouraging, and I'm really pleased I went there despite all the other things I've said. Okay, that's me.
I'm now going to pass the baton over to Heathcliff to celebrate geography.
Hello. Okay, so the title of this is Bedford College Initiates Male Geographers. I don't know what that means. I don't know what ceremonies they went through. Here we go. I was richly blessed in being one of 45 first male undergraduate entrants to Bedford College in 1965. We were a mixed bunch. In the wider group, there were some I thoroughly disliked. I suspect the feelings were mutual. However, the 9 of us who were geographers always had a positive time for each other throughout the 3 years. Approval to admit men was given during 1965, too late to change the UCCA prospectus and admissions procedures taking place during the 1964-5 academic year. Consequently, we were all accepted at the last minute by the UCCA clearing scheme and scraped into the life-changing experience of university by the skin of our teeth. Yes, like surviving what should have been a fatal accident, I speak from experience. And I don't speak from experience, by the way, he speaks from experience. And life-changing. The very word university was meant to conjure up something of just that very meaning then. These days, I think it has become rather different. Then, and even looking back, we few men seemed to sweep the college like a tidal wave. In no time, hitherto unthought of sports teams materialized. There was a large, comfortable undergraduate common room where, from the outset, the male-female ratio, 45 to 1,000 plus in college as a whole, was greater by a factor of maybe 5 or 10 to 1. There I learned the relaxation, if not the art of bridge playing, which has absorbed me for many 100 of cheerful social hours since. I think it took a year for a bar to open. When it did, there were always men, and often only men, in it. It served Younger's tartan keg bitter at 2 shillings 3p a pint. I had already acquired the taste for a good Bedfordshire pint of ale and was perplexed by this fizzy metallic tasting product. Years later, I learned that it was marketed so that it would remain the same even if monkeys served it, and would probably not deteriorate if it was kept for 1,000 years. A popular and charismatic geology lecturer, Bill Bishop, initiated the Bedford Light Opera Group blog. This successfully produced an annual production, starting in the first 2 years with Gilbert and Sullivan. Bill had no trouble recruiting an equal number of male chorus and parts to match the ladies. I was the only geographer in this at first, and mated with an amiable geologist, John Garlick. Trial by jury was the first effort. Men sang all the parts of the judge, defendant, and male chorus, the jury. It was short and necessarily frugal, so we made our own costumes. Someone lent me a military-style jacket, and I offset this with a smart pair of riding boots bought for a song on a cycle trip through Portobello Market. The boots caused a stir and a laugh when worn hiking the moors on the geography field trip at Appleby that Easter, and were useful for fancy-dressed purposes thereafter. It always astonished me that I was the only person to regularly use a bicycle. Maybe most folks thought in modern times that it just wasn't cool. However, it was fast, convenient, good exercise, saved a fortune, and over the years enabled me to know most of London like the back of my hand, a fulfilling experience indeed for a geographer. I was never without one, except when it was stolen. This happened for the very first time after a visit to Regent's Park Zoo, and recurred thereafter with exponential regularity in keeping with the changing times. During some following years, I eventually totaled 23 stolen bicycles, which I regarded in those days as something of a world record. It was in the popular field of student union administration and politics that the invading men really made their mark, and in this the geographers made more than their fair share of the impact. During our first year, Bill Maxted was elected the first male president of the Bedford Students' Union. The next year, Monty Grigg and myself both held offices along with other men in the Student Union Executive, and both of us ran along with 4 other men and no women in the elections to succeed Bill as president. In the event, it was Chris Foley, a psychologist, who won that year, but it was Monty Grigg who was elected to take over from him the year after. I arrived at Bedford with fashionably youthful left-wing views. Perhaps this was a short-term aberration, since fashion and me have never been natural bedfellows. Over those years, my attitude swung in very much the opposite direction. Searching for reasons, one found that as geographers, our subject contained bits of just about every other academic discipline under the sun, making us classic jacks of all trades and masters of none. This, mixed with some knowledge of historical 19th and 20th century geopolitics, encouraged an earthly realism which began to cast doubts over theoretical, sanctimonious, liberal claptrap, of which I'm quite a fan, by the way. Maybe the greatest influence was cultivated by the very nature of Bedford College itself. It retained its exclusive finishing school charisma. Its leafy setting in classical Regent's Park, with its elegant Regency villas and flanked by the lake, made it a delight. All this in the middle of the opportunities and variety of life afforded by the great metropolis gave it advantages to match or surpass those of almost any Oxbridge college, except in matters of academic cachet. Maturing just a little in such surroundings could not help, it seems to me, casting a stark light of truth on the inconsistency and ultimate absurdity of material egalitarianism. Of course, there were a few vociferous radical dissenters, but at the time, the general attitudes, policies, and above all mood of the Bedford Students' Union was as like to those of the well-known London School of Economics as chalk is to cheese. However, looking at the state of the world in which we now find ourselves and looking over 30 years at the things we thought, did, or tried to do at the time, we can see with the benefit of hindsight how unimportant they were. Perhaps it says much for the timeless quality of a female intuition, even true wisdom indeed, that the majority of the women turned round to their studies with something of a yawn and said to the male intruders, "Oh, well, if they want to, let them get on with it. What's new?" Now, I still have my fashionable left-wing views, but other than that, I think it's been really interesting for me to obviously really get to know the Bedford College archive and to get to know as many of you as I possibly can. And I feel like almost a kind of a conversion practice has kind of taken place. And I think a lot of our current students, very naturally being on this campus, feel very kind of Halloweenian. I think I certainly feel that the slight of a conversion to where I feel this kind of dual personality towards being a Bedfordian as well. And for me, as a young person looking at the history and the importance of Bedford College, I think it's become all the more important that we encourage that kind of conversion in our students now. You know, we can't let the memory of Bedford College go when the last person in Regent's Park kind of shuffles off this mortal coil, as it were. And I'm not going to let that happen personally. And so to that end, with the help of the Centre for Victorian Studies, which I'm the co-director of, there is the hope to bring an intergenerational event with the Bedford Society and with current students to come and share stories and learn more and really get to know what Bedford truly is. I don't want to hear any more questions from my undergrads about why there are about 5 different names of libraries in the library book. You know, we've got Founders Library, Tate Library, Royal Holloway Library. I want them to know, I want that to be common knowledge for our students of what Tate Library was and what the Bedford book collection meant and is still existing in the Royal Holloway collection now. So our plan is, with the Victorian Centre for Victorian Studies, is to have an intergenerational event made in tandem with anyone who wants to come and tell their stories. Maybe we have some of the blazers out from the archives, bring things out, have these kind of physical artifact stories, and then follow that with a training session on transcriptions to really push the transcriptions of Mrs. Reed's letters. That's the kind of Victorian bent, so I can get the funding from the Victorian Society to do this. Victorian women is what I'm calling it. A training session to learn how to transcribe, and then our plan is to hopefully pair a current student with a member of the Bedford Society to kind of be chatting with each other and emailing each other and helping each other to transcribe maybe 5 letters in tandem with each other together. But in order to get the funding for that, in order to justify it to Helen Kingston, who runs the centre, we need names, we need interest. So you may have seen throughout the day a big orange blob with some lines under it. That's the Victorian Studies logo, the orange blob. And please put your names down, please put your emails down, not just to join in, although we'd love you, as many of you as possible, to join in and to come and to help and to do the training and to transcribe, but just names that show that you guys are interested, you at least want to hear updates on what's happening, so that I can then take that to Helen and we can get things going. The 4th of December is the date we're hoping to get this, so I'm really trying to kind of hurry up and get it going. So please, sign up. Thanks.
My message is from Dame Margaret Miles, who was governor, the last governor of Bedford College. Can you hear me now? Yes. That's good. The position of governor at Bedford is at an end now. At Royal Holloway College, they do not have such a body, and the new college won't either. Theoretically, the governors governed, e.g., they received and approved the annual reports of the council. They did not normally initiate or make policy, but they could reject commendations of council. For example, they could have rejected the recommendation that men should be admitted. I remember the meeting at which the proposal was discussed, and there was strong opposition, including that of Dame Kathleen Lonsdale. The rule that 2/3 majority of those present and voting was needed to approve a recommendation slowed up the move towards a merger with RHSC. And a further meeting had to be held as the council did not get the required majority. I agreed to join the council at Regent's College, as it gave me a chance of sharing in the development of the new college and of seeing what was going on to happen to the site. The Rockford part appeals to me, but I am not bothered by the possibility, but I am bothered by the possibility of a private medical school occupying too large a part of the site. After all, Bedford College was founded at the same time as Bedford, and women were the members. Now, I've had some discussion about Rockford and Regent's College with my good friend here. And it appears that Bedford became Regent's College because it was in Regent's Park. But the Rockford part, we were mystified by. And the fact that it was going to become a private medical school was a mystery. We don't know what happened there. Anyway, in my day, this is Dame Margaret speaking, 1930 to 1933, we had little contact with Royal Holloway College, and only through matches and debates. We rather looked down on RHHC, and as indeed we did on Westfield.
Yes. Embarrassing. True.
Dame Margaret must have read history. The Economic History Group went to LSE for some lectures. I was taught there by Eileen Power and R.H. Tawney, two great names. But we didn't mix with SL students or into LSE life, only through the University of London Students' Union. But the Bedford Union was weak. There were few serious issues to fight over. It was more of a social body. I was president of the union in my third year, and this meant attending meetings and dinners, etc., at NUS headquarters and in the different colleges. I held this office in my third year, doing finals with no concessions. We tried once to involve all students, made by attempting to introduce proportional representation on a particular issue, but it didn't work. Mainly, I think, because we didn't understand the many different methods of proportional representation. There seemed to be no need for student conflict. The principal was on our side. She lived on the site, knew us, invited us to coffee, and had our lectures at heart, interest at heart. After all, we were only 600 or so. The athletics union existed alongside the union and had a separate office and offices. It organised sports and intercollegiate matches, etc. We lived very simply and our expectations were low. It was only after the Second World War that student expectations rocketed. We wore our gowns for lectures and dinner, and we were conscientious about work and recreation. We mostly went to the theatre and for long walks, and some of us played games, lacrosse and tennis in my case. We were waited on at dinner, and all the residences, Reed, Sean, and Bedford College House, and in all the residences, there were maids to make the fires, the beds, and fill our ewes, and do all the cleaning and cooking. One of the things which exemplified the boarding atmosphere was a secret society called the AT Club. You joined by invitation only and wore a special tie, and there were simple initiation ceremonies, and you had to drink alcohol out of silver mugs. Oh, very silly.
Shame.
Miss Jebb said, the students before the war, 1939-45, were ashamed of taking public money. The students after the war were ashamed of taking their parents' money. If you had a particular bent for anything in most girls' schools, you were advised to do English and to go to Oxford or Cambridge. Bedford usually ran second. In spite of the theoretical greater opportunity now, in practice, the disappearance of the spinster, earlier marriage, and lack of domestic service makes it hard for women to get to the top. It is depressing to see how so few women MPs, ministers, permanent secretaries, consultants, etc. And what's more, to see top jobs that were traditionally filled by women, for example, heads of girls' schools, matrons of hospitals, are going to men. If you look back at pre-war Bedford, the secret of its excess and its spirit lay in the size and powerful principals and top administrators. Miss Duke, Miss Jebb, Miss Mankhouse, Miss Hayden, all strong, dedicated people who stayed for a long time. They created a good human spirit. Now, that is the end of my written piece. I can't really remember very much about my initiation into Bedford College itself. I know I turned up to register, and met a fellow Staffordshire person who had heard of me and I of her, but we'd never met. However, we soon made friends, and I kept in touch mainly through Jill, who was the person I knew about. And we kept touch until recent times, Jill sending out a round robin letter every year to us. Unfortunately, many members of that group have now died. And at the age of 88, I'm feeling quite confident that I shall go on for another 88 years. However, I do remember we wore gowns to lectures because I have a photograph of me wearing my gown. I don't know about dining in a hall because I never went into one of Bedford halls. I went to an intercollegiate hall, Knutford House.
Oh.
And I gather there's someone else.
No, but a fellow student of mine was in that.
Yes.
I was in Knutford House as well.
And you were too. So at Knutford House, I did remember we had had dinner there. Did you dine in Knutford
Yes, and
House?
when I was there, I remember having a formal dinner once a week.
Oh, I don't remember dinners at all. Maybe I didn't feel hungry by then. But I don't remember having to wear a gown other than for lectures. We had luncheon. We usually went to a place called The Home, neighbouring place, for a sandwich and soup. And we also got a good look at the people of the Archaeological Society headquarters next door. And I developed an interest in archaeology there, which I still have. And I wanted to do a postgraduate course. But I'd met my husband by then, and he was very much against this, as he wanted to go into industry, which he did. And he did very well indeed. But I became a housewife after working initially in Fleet Street and then going on to be a school teacher in the Midlands. And after that, I just raised my children. I did consider going back into teaching, but it was not my wildest choice of a career. I still hankered after the archaeology and read and read and read masses of books about archaeology and envy the young ladies now who are archaeologists because they were all men in those days. I don't ever remember seeing or hearing of a female archaeologist in my youth at all. But now we see them on the television all the time. I remember when the Queen Mother, who was the patron of Bedford, came to visit, and we all had to be very spruced up and wearing our gowns. And she walked among us in the gardens at Bedford, which was quite a thrilling experience. I'd never met or seen a member of the royal family so close up in my life before. There was another occasion when Vogue came looking for models. And I can remember there was one very petite, dark-haired girl, and she was chosen to be the model for Vogue magazine. But it was strange, you know, I suppose because we were a women's college, and we were in London, they chose our college to come to. And men in those days were just not thought about as fellow members. If we wanted to go meet men, we went out to other colleges. And I became quite acquainted with Imperial College at the time for the Saturday night dance. And I had a boyfriend there, and then I met my husband, or the man who became my husband, and the boyfriend was forgotten, and I was going off to Oxford to see my husband every weekend, or every other weekend. Every other weekend, yes, because he came to London sometimes. My memories of lectures are of some brilliant lectures by Dame Lillian Penson, who headed the department then. And I remember going to a lecture at Senate House by a monk.
David Knowles.
David Knowles. And he was a brilliant lecturer. And I could remember almost every word he said. And of course, I'd specialised in medieval history, so it was very relevant to what I was studying at the time. And the two lecturers who became professors ultimately were Dr. Duboulet and Dr. Lawrence. And they were the people who initiated the period of history I studied and the subject that I studied for A-levels.
Oh, that's very interesting.
That is my memory.
I'm conscious of time. We have to be for tea no later than 3:30, so I'm going for 3:15 to give you time. I was going to read about a librarian, but I'm not going to, other than to celebrate the fact that during the Second World War, Bedford was occupied by both the BBC and the Dutch government, as well as the Ministry of Food. But there is a wonderful, wonderful extract from the librarian, because I'm just going to read the very bit at the end. The library was very dark, and I suppose heating was very restricted, as apparently it was very damp and cold. I was taught to classify and catalogue and mark books, but had little to do with the users of the books because they were in Cambridge. So all the students had gone, but the poor librarian was on their own. I hope that these readings have inspired you, sparked a thought, a memory, but the themes that follow through of students struggling with money, trying to get away from home, what course to do, where to go, friendship issues. I'm quite happy to walk around the room with the microphone if anybody, and David has at the back, if anybody's got a really brief comment to make. If you ever want any questions or anything, just email me and I will try and answer them. Over to the floor.
I have a question. Who is the anonymous geographer?
Yes.
I can't remember. I have got it somewhere. It wasn't written on the transcript, but there is a letter that accompanies that.
This doesn't make sense. Thank you all for those. They were really fascinating. I've taught at Bedford College and then at Royal Holloway, so I feel I know a lot about it, but I learned a lot in the last hour. One of the things that strikes me as different is that when I first taught at Bedford in 1964, most of the students came from all over England. I mean, you mentioned Staffordshire.
Yes.
And That is not the way it happens now. The students tend to come from the southeast of England. That geographical range was one of the really striking things about the undergraduate community at that time. The other thing is, at the very early days, most of the people who taught were probably not married women. And that also has changed. Those are just two comments on some of the things you said.
Thank you. Just as an example, it wasn't until 1948 that female teachers at Royal Holloway could be married.
Really?
Can I make a small follow-up to what Caroline's just said? I was a student and Caroline was one of my most beloved lecturers at the time. And it would have been around, I think, 1972, I might be wrong, when Germaine Greer came to give a lecture. I think it was a Fawcett lecture at Bedford College. And a friend of mine who was a sociologist from another institution and very feminist told me about this, and we went together and we appreciated the lecture and then left. In order to get to Baker Street, the gates were shut. My friend Lou suggested that we climb over the fence. And just as we were climbing over, along came Professor de Boulay and sort of not reprimanded us, but I recognised him. I got off the gate very quickly. And he then said to us, have you been to the lecture? And we said, yeah. And then he said, should you really be doing this? And my friend Lou, who had an umbrella, poked him in the stomach and said, why should we listen to you? You're just a man. I had to go and have, a tutorial with him next day. He then said to me, what did you think of the lecture? And then he said, just as I was answering, he said, and I hope you noticed that at 5 o'clock precisely, our very good colleague, Professor Barron, Dr. Barron, left because, as you know, she had a family and had duties. And I just looked and I thought, right, yes. And I have a great admiration for anyone then, as a woman, with all the responsibilities of family and everything that goes with that, nevertheless, holding down a fantastic career, being a wonderful academic and doing all that research. God only knows where the hours came from.
I didn't pay her to say that.
I have a question, and that's for all of the speakers, and thank you very much indeed for the talks. In my generation, we were very conscious of being part of Bedford College and totally dedicated to be part of Bedford College, but also part of the wider University of London. We could go anywhere as history students. We could go and use any library. We could go and sit in on any lectures. And so we were really proud of the fact that we were both Bedfordians and part of the University of London. And I don't know if any of you want to comment on that or anyone else wants to comment on that. Before I hand on the mic, just a question to Heathcliff. You talked about the Jessa Reed letters, and I'm so glad that's getting off the ground. Before we finish, maybe you could say a little bit more about what that will involve.
Do we want to do London first?
Yeah.
Any London comments, ladies?
Just briefly, I think to say that I studied French with German, but quite often we did go to University of London premises in Mallet Street for our German, and also to use the library. So yes, well, I agree that one did feel that but I think just living in London itself, though, has made one feel that one was reaching more broadly than just being based, especially if, like Lady Peach, one was in an intercollegiate hall of residence where one was mixing with, a School of Oriental Studies, LSE, veterinary and medical schools and so on. So, I think, and also there were lots of advantages to that in that you got very cheap tickets to National Theatre, to the Royal Albert Hall, Royal Festival Hall and so on. So, and that was, I think, a concession to London University rather than to individual colleges.
I'll just say really quickly, I don't remember the blazer, but I wore unbelievably proudly my Bedford scarf with the London University colours on one side and the Bedford on the other. And I still actually have that scarf. And
I never had a blazer. And I didn't remember any person other than one who actually wore a blazer, a Bedford blazer, in my college. But it's funny.
Yes, so I mean, it's quite interesting just from a kind of a current student perspective as well, in terms of like the University of London and things like that. Obviously, like the Federation of the University of London has changed now, and a lot of about 2017, 2018 maybe, the law changed and a lot of the college became universities in their own right, and so there isn't that kind of interchange. Although I love Senate House, I mean, and I go there. I think the undergrads maybe don't as much, but the postgrads do. Anyway, yes, so it's the Jessery event for the letters is, there was one similar, it happened I think in maybe about 2019, before my time, and it's basically Dr. Katie McGettigan in the English department, who a lot of you would have seen speaking about the letters at the Regent's Park event, is going to be helping us with it as well. Essentially, a lot of the letters from in Mrs. Reed's collection are now digitized. Not all of them are, so that's part of the reason we're hoping to get some funding through the Centre for Victorian Studies, is to pay for that digitization. The archive has digitization equipment, just need to pay someone to take the pictures. After that, it will be Katie McGettigan and myself running a training program, and we're really, really keen, of course, to have external and internal students and Bedford Society volunteers coming in. The problem becomes trying to figure out ways to have the external email addresses working on internal systems. And that's what has been basically the biggest hindrance to this keeping on going. So our hope is by having a kind of an event first, that intergenerational event, and food paid for by the Centre for Victorian Studies, we'll be able to encourage those current students who have those internal email addresses, all important, to pair with a member of the Bedford Society to work on these letters together, and to kind of work as a team, not on site, to do it from home, maybe messaging each other, emailing each other if you get stuck on things, and supporting one another. Because basically, trying to have a kind of a transcription day where we bring external and internal volunteers together on campus is proving the biggest hindrance. So our hope is to bring together, get to know each other, get trained, and then kind of do it, not on your own, but kind of do it off of your own computers, basically.
Could I follow that up?
Yeah.
I just want to encourage anybody to do that, because I went on this training day just before lockdown, I think it was, looking at the letters. It was a super day. First of all, they gave us coffee, then they talked about it, then they gave us lunch, but we actually got to work in the end. And the points about these letters are, first of all, they wrote to each other 3 times a day, and they wrote in beautiful handwriting. So anybody who learned cursive script, which a lot of people did, will not find it difficult. And I'm sure we'll get training on the digitization bit and the technical bit. So it was real fun, and do sign up.
Well, our time is finished, sadly. Thank you for taking the time to share this time and listen to our extracts. If you ever want to explore the archives more, you are able to come on Tuesdays and Thursdays and we would love to see you. Thank you for your time. I'm sure there'll be lots of conversations over tea, which will be served shortly in the Founders Building. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for their time in preparing to talk to us. Thank you.
Yeah.